Okay, thank you so much, Allie, for the introduction. I'm realizing my water is very far away, and I don't want to be that person who's going to have to struggle to actually drink it. But again, so to thank you, Allie, for the introduction, and also thank you, Allie and Diane, for the invitation, as well as the Committee for Race and Indigeneity and Ethnicity at AMS. I also want to thank you all for spending this late Thursday afternoon, this windy late Thursday afternoon with me. I'm going to try to make this as fun as possible. It is Prince after all. And I offer, for those who are not from the Twin Cities, I want to welcome everyone to the Twin Cities. I hope you have a lot of fun here. I've been fortunate and honored to call this my home for the past 12 years. And so my kind of talk today is basically something that perhaps I should not be doing as this kind of like big lecture thing, which is I'm going to be talking about something that I've actually never presented on before. And so to that end, really, I'm very much open to any kinds of feedback, any kinds of critiques, anything really that you might want to be able to offer me as I kind of wade through this. I also would want some grace a little bit if things don't quite come together the way that I think that they do in my mind, but this will be the first time actually talking about it in front of an audience. I will say these are ideas that I've been working around for a while, but this is the first time that it's like actually presenting something like this. And as Ellie mentioned, right, this is part of a new project that I'm working on that I'm calling it sort of Erotic City for the time being. It doesn't have a subtitle, so like if you can find a subtitle, I will be more than open to that. But it's currently, again, really framed as really sort of Erotic City, which is a pun on a particular Prince song as well. This book is very much part of my broader scholarly interest in the intersections of race and sexuality, popular music. And especially this book is thinking about Minneapolis music and sex cultures in the 1980s and how an analysis of Prince's 1980s catalog helps us to re-theorize what was then called and sometimes still called the feminist sex wars, the feminist porn wars. And I'll talk more about this in a second. But this is basically what the book is about, or at least what I'm imagining the book to actually be about. So I want to start this talk by the photo that's on this title slide. And in December 20th, 1984, Reverend Stephen Peters, along with his brother Dan, that's them obviously in the front, and 6 youth members of their Zion Christian Center Church began the first day of a multi-day protest outside of the steps of the Minnesota State Capitol in St. Paul. The Peters brothers and members of the congregation were protesting Minneapolis Governor Rudy Perpich, the St. Paul City Council, and Minneapolis-based artist Prince. In particular, they were protesting 2 things. First, they were protesting Prince's upcoming 5-day concert series at the St. Paul Civic Center, beginning on really December 23rd and ending on December 28th. That was very much a part of the Purple Rain Tour. The Peters brothers were nationally really notorious religious leaders who traveled around the country and organized similar kinds of protests where they would also burn music that they deemed to be unchristian and immoral. For the Peters brothers, Prince's songs like Sister, which details incest, or Head, which focus on the joys of oral sex, made Prince, and the recent Purple Rain album cut Darling Nikki, which centered on a woman's really sort of masturbatory pleasures, all made Prince, in Stephen Peters' words, quote, the filthiest singer in America, end quote. But the Peters brothers were also protesting outside the state capitol because Governor Perpich and the St. Paul City Council had formally proclaimed Prince's 5-day concert stay as quote unquote Prince Days, as a way to honor Prince's contributions to music and film in the state of Minnesota. For the Peters brothers and the supporters, celebrating, quote, the filthiest singer in America during Christmas was an affront to Christianity and detracted from the celebration of Jesus' birth. And so for a week, they demanded that the governor and the city council apologize and rescind the proclamation. It would be a battle that they would eventually lose. I just want to quickly point out my favorite part of the picture on the left is what happened to Minnesota. I love that kind of, it's just what happened in Minnesota, right? It's this big whole freak out, because the state has completely gone to shit, apparently. Nevertheless, there's something that I find interesting about the first day of their protests outside of the state capitol. So I'm gonna go back to the title piece. And it's something that, like many things for us academics, we find in the archive that set things in motion. So for me, when I saw this, I was like, oh, this is a project idea. Two of the youth who are holding posters read, "Prince of Peace, not Prince of Porn." Prince of Peace obviously is an allusion to Jesus Christ, but Prince of Porn is actually deeper than we might simply read as a kind of pun, use of real sort of alliteration. Indeed, debates over pornography in 1983 and 1984 had made Minnesota, and Minneapolis in particular, a national hot topic. So really, in December of 1983, Minneapolis made history as the first city to have its legislative body, that being the city council, successfully vote for a civil rights ordinance banning pornography. Minneapolis anti-pornography civil rights ordinance was really the latest event in what's known as the feminist sex wars, which for the purposes of this talk refers to the then 2-decade-long feminist debate over the place, politics, and power of porn. For those deemed anti-porn feminists, really pornography was a great threat to the liberation of women and sustained the oppression of women, as it, in their eyes, was a central causal link to the institutional and interpersonal violence against women. For those deemed anti-porn feminists, or what we today might call sex-positive feminists, they rejected this position of anti-porn feminism. Some, very much like Ellen Willis, argued, quote, that if feminists define pornography per se as the enemy, then if they define pornography per se as the enemy, the result will be to make a lot of women ashamed of their sexual feelings and afraid to be honest about them. And the last thing that women need to be the last thing that women need is more sexual shame, guilt, and hypocrisy, end quote. And other anti-porn feminists went even further than Willis, arguing that pornography could serve as sites from which women could find and name pleasure, and very much interested in how, as the scholar Pamela Butler notes, quote, how sex could be liberating for women, end quote. Locally in Minneapolis, women residents had been organizing against porn establishments since really the 1970s, especially in residential neighborhoods in South Minneapolis. One particular protest in South Minneapolis along Lake Street. There's another protest also involving Lake Street, where they fought to move these porn stores to more common sets of commercial areas in downtown. While these feminist organizers initially thought that they had found a victory in using Minneapolis' zoning law to keep porn stores away from residential areas, by 1982, very much an appellate court found that such laws were unconstitutional, leaving local feminist organizers to wonder what steps to take next. But all was not lost. By the fall of 1983, this is when we have a university law professor and noted anti-pornography feminist by the name of Catherine McKinnon had joined forces with her friend and fellow anti-pornography feminist named Andrea Dworkin in teaching an anti-porn class at the University of Minnesota's law school. What's more, Dworkin and McKinnon attended a South Minneapolis organizing meeting about the state of porn stores within the city. And it's there that Dworkin and McKinnon argue that rather than attempt to regulate porn to sets of commercial areas like downtown Minneapolis, it would be better for women in Minneapolis and all women more broadly if Minneapolis banned porn altogether. To do so, Dworkin and McKinnon contended that Minneapolis should adopt an anti-pornography ordinance that centered on porn as an outright violation of women's civil rights. Consequently, that really anyone could file a lawsuit against anyone producing, selling, or advertising pornography. The goal then was to sue porn makers and distributors out of existence. To go even further, really, a Republican city councilwoman by the name of Charlie Hoyt was so taken in a good way with Dworkin and McKinnon's proposal that she asked them to help draft such an ordinance and hoped that the city council could take up the case. So under a $5,000 contract, Dworkin and McKinnon consulted and drafted the language for the ordinance. And so at the start of December of 1983, the city council heard arguments for and against this particular ordinance. And in the end, on December 30th, 1983, the city council voted in favor of the ordinance. Now, very much while the mayor of Minneapolis, whose name is Donald Frazier, would veto the ordinance a few days later in January of 1984, the ordinance had already started to have political and legislative effect across the nation. So with the success of the city council passing this ordinance, other cities started to follow suit. For example, cities like Indianapolis, with the help of Catherine McKinnon, used the Minneapolis anti-porn ordinance as a model to pass similar kinds of legislation. This one passed through the city council and was signed by the mayor. Other cities like Madison, Wisconsin, Des Moines, Iowa, as well as Detroit, Michigan, St. Louis, Missouri, and even Los Angeles began to debate taking similar kinds of maneuvers. Even the Minneapolis City Council would later try to repass the same kind of anti-pornography ordinance in June of 1984. But like their effort in December of 1983, the mayor actually vetoed this one as well. This is a particular protest that took place outside of the mayor of Minneapolis' office in downtown Minneapolis that summer of 1984. So you might be wondering why I am going on this long detour to talk about the sex wars. Well, again, to go back to this photograph at the front of the state capitol, I want to kind of really point out here that the Prince of Porn phrase is not simply a play on words. Rather, what I want to argue is that it's actually an attempt to take hold of the then contemporary political moment of the feminist sex wars and the effects by local politicians across the nations to ban porn. That is, very much the use of Prince of Porn, for me, is an attempt to tap into the then current cultural and political moment. To say if locally said porn is bad, and we've made strides in banning porn and other cities are following our lead, then calling Prince the Prince of Porn, I'm speaking as if I'm one of the Peters brothers, might on a local and national level similarly ban Prince. But more than this, or perhaps very much in a kind of addition to this, I want to argue here, this is what I'm really trying to argue in the book, is that these protest posters and their use of the Prince of Porn is also an attempt to insert Prince into the feminist sex wars narrative. The phrase Prince of Porn as a reference to artist Prince and the activist movement surrounding pornography is also a provocation, an invitation to imagine Prince alongside and part of the feminist sex wars. This is one of the arguments that I'm trying to make in this book. So this talk today is very much an acceptance of such a kind of invitation. Indeed, today I'd like to consider what happens when we insert Prince into the sex wars narrative. What, if anything, shifts? How, if at all, it shifts? How we might think through and theorize the feminist sex wars differently if we add Prince to the mix and vice versa. In what follows, I'm going to consider some and other questions, and I want to argue that rendering really relational, making intimate, Prince and the sex wars helps to complicate dominant framings of the sex wars. In particular, the feminist sex wars have largely been discussed as a heteronormative white feminist debate or divide, belying a reality of the sex wars in very much that queer and trans feminists, feminists of color, and those at the intersections had a stake in the sex wars. Thus, by looking at a black artist like Prince and his gender and sexually sort of transgressive artistry, I want to contend here that we can bring this reality of the sex wars more to the fore and to develop a more textured and intersectional approach in the understanding of this political period. So to do so, I want to briefly examine two unreleased Prince or Prince-related songs from 1983, that being Vanity 6 song titled Vibrator, and Prince and the Revolution song called We Can Fuck. Following my analysis of these songs, I'll return to the Peters Brothers protests and the aftermath of such protests. So going in chronological order here, let's start with Vibrator, which is written and produced by Prince in May of 1983. Vibrator was really sort of initially planned to be on the sophomore album for actually Vanity 6, right? Which is Prince's kind of all-women's group. But after Vanity left the group in late sort of 1982, early 1983, Prince decided to actually shelve the track. But Vibrator is what you might kind of imagine what it's about. In particular, the song focuses on a woman growing sexually tired, exhausted, and frustrated with her male significant other. And so she reminds him and she reminds herself that she has a sex toy, that can fulfill her needs, her desires, and her pleasures. Now, while I'm tempted to actually play the whole song, and I highly recommend that you do so, the song is about like a little over 7 minutes, so we don't have time to actually listen to the entire thing. Instead, I'm gonna focus on really the break in the song, where Vanity's character is masturbating with her vibrator, and then the worst thing happens. The batteries die. Not to be defeated though, Vanity's character goes to the nearest store to find some new batteries, and so this is the clip that I'm going to focus on here, and I'm realizing I can't see the timestamp of this, so I might. Oh, I see, okay, thank you. Back it up to here, okay.
With you, it's always abandoned ship. And we didn't even get away from the dock tonight. Eat your heart out. Vibrator makes me feel so good. Vibrator, don't you wish you could? Vibrator, his patience can't be beat. Vibrator, I guess you could say that you're obsolete. Ha 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 ha. Is it my imagination? Are you with the boys again? You used to take me with you. I used to be your best friend. But now I'm just a plaything. Your ego-feeding female sex machine. Well, you can take a hike, mister, 'cause you're the poorest excuse for a man I've ever seen. Eat your heart out, sucker. Vibrator makes me feel so good. Vibrator, don't you wish you could? Vibrator, his patience can't be beat. Vibrator, I guess you could say that you're obsolete. Vibrator makes me feel so good. Vibrator makes me feel so good. Uh-oh. Oh no. Oh, please don't die on me now. Oh. May I help you? Yes, I was wondering if
So, there are a number of things that interest me here. First, it needs to be stressed how, okay, this is going to be a serious part of the conversation. First, it needs to be stressed how important it is in this moment for a black woman like Vanity to sing about sex and sexual pleasures and to articulate a sexual desire as a sexually desiring subject. It matters because it speaks back to what Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham describes as the politics of silence and the politics of respectability that have long framed black women's response to sex and sexuality. For Higginbotham, the politics of silence and the politics of respectability were historically situated strategies that black women used as a way to combat the trope of the hypersexual, sexually primitive, and uncivilized black woman, and how such a trope was used to justify and render really sort of irrelevant the sexual assaults of black women. The politics of silence and respectability therefore demanded that black women be either silent about sex or present themselves as highly moral and respectable. But as black feminist hip-hop studies scholars like Joan Morgan have argued, the perhaps unintended consequence of such strategies is that they treat sex as a danger, leaving black women unable to develop robust grammar, an articulation of what pleasure means for black women. Morgan refers to such an approach as, quote, the politics of pleasure that seeks to make room for, quote, honest bodies that also like to fuck, end quote. In Vibrator, we find the politics of respectability and the politics of pleasure going head to head. When Vanity goes to the first store and encounters the first employee, who's played by Prince's muse, and black woman named Jill Jones, that's her in the middle, and her character shames Vanity's character, She judges the size of the vibrator, apparently puts on gloves to handle it as if it's dirty and contaminated, and then offers to take it to the hidden underground basement to get batteries. Refusing to conform to the politics of respectability of Jones's character, Vanity's character leaves the store, right? I'm gonna take my business elsewhere. I bring up the politics of respectability, silence, and pleasure here because I want to highlight what's at stake and what's missing in the larger feminist sex wars. For Black women, the 1980s debates between anti-porn feminists and sex-positive feminists must contend with the historical and ongoing violation of Black women, as well as Black women's responses to such historical legacies and aftermath. Indeed, lest we forget, Hortense Spillers first really delivered her classic critique article entitled titled Interstices, a small drama of words, at the infamous Scholar and Feminist 9 conference at Barnard College in 1982. The controversy surrounding that conference is too complicated and detailed for me to get into today, but the anti-pornography feminist attacks on this conference led it to becoming a pivotal moment in the sex wars. Nevertheless, Spillers was invited to this conference to discuss Black women's sexuality, but she did not see, quote, vocabulary that would make it possible to entertain the sexuality of Black women. That's the full quote. That, as really scholars like Shaniqua Roach have very much discussed, quote, white women and white female experience had dictated feminist thinking about the conditions of possibilities for female sexuality, pleasure, and danger, end quote. And thus this all left Hortense Spillers to famously claim that, quote, Black women are the beached whales of the sexual universe, unvoiced, misseen, not doing, and awaiting their verb, end quote. Importantly, while Spillers laments and critiques the dearth of Black sexuality discourses, she finds space from which Black women and Black women's sexuality might speak, that and blues music. In this way, I might want to ask us how we might read and listen to Vanity 6, and especially a song like Vibrator, as part of a broader lineage of queer and sexually transgressive songs by Black blues women, of Ma Rainey, of Bessie Smith, of Lucille Bogan, of Ida Cox, and others that Angela Davis, Hazel Carby, Daphne Brooks, and so many other Black feminist music scholars have studied over the years. Indeed, with Vanity's character genesis her man in favor of her vibrator, Prince and Vanity move us to consider a place through which Black women can locate pleasure with and within themselves. It's a literal and figurative pushing out of men in order to riff off of and bring back, again, sort of Joan Morgan's politics of pleasure, to make room for bodies that also like to fuck. In so doing, Vibrator highlights in part what must become necessary for a Black woman's pleasure politics in general, but an intersectional approach to the sex wars more broadly. And it's on this subject of intersectionality that I want to turn to Prince's character on Vibrator. Once Vanity leaves the second store, it seems as if the shame from the first store got to Vanity's character. She's a bit meeker, and she refers to her vibrator as a body massager. But the employee at the second store, played by Prince, breaks her from that shame, joking with her and calling her bluff. While some have read Prince's character as a woman, I actually want to read this character as a Black queer man. The quick wit, the shade, the flamboyancy registered to me as elements of what Marlon Riggs called a snap queen. But whereas Riggs decries Black straight men's appropriation of the snap queen as, quote, a mere signpost of effeminate, cute, comic forms of homosexuality, robbing it a full sense of political and cultural dimension, end quote, I want to see Prince's take of the snap queen as still politically meaningful. Prince's and Vanity's characters find solidarity in their store encounter, not simply through their enjoyment of sex, right? Prince's character jokes that, like, yeah, my back acts up when I sort of come home from my man as well, right? But more broadly, to how both Black women and Black queer men have had to contend with the politics of silence and the politics of respectability that are often used to ally their sexual desires, pleasures, and practices in the name of racial uplift. Moreover, within the context of Minneapolis, queer men were often innocent bystanders in the anti-pornography movement. As late Blizzard geographer named Kevin Ehrman Solberg noted, porn establishments in Minneapolis were sites of cruising for queer men and frequently some of the few spaces of queer male intimacy within the Twin Cities. Anti-pornography sets of feminists were largely unaware of this fact, believing that these porn establishments were sites of heteropatriarchal power and sociality. And so when they pressured the closing of these porn establishments and when they protested in front of and called the police on these establishments, they threatened to eliminate space of queer male intimacy as well as further the criminalization of queer sexualities. It's against this historical context that Prince's character develops even more meaning to me. He's not only unapologetic as being a black queer man, but one who might actually be working at a porn establishment. We don't know this for sure. The Vanity's character is patronizing a porn store or a sex toy store in the scene with Prince's character. But context clues, especially that Prince recognizes what kind of batteries her vibrator needs without examining it, suggests that it might be a porn store, right? There's a kind of question, how does Prince know what batteries are supposed to go in this? To that end, Prince's character, for me at least, renders visible male queerness, and in particular black male queerness within these porn establishments. And via him helping rid Vanity's character of her shame and helping her find the right batteries for her vibrator, Prince's character renders black queer men as allies with black women and developing healthier sexually liberated experiences for both sets of communities. And so it's this kind of sexual liberation that Prince would pursue a few months later with the song entitled We Can Fuck. So on New Year's Eve, on December 31st of 1983, Prince went to the studio at Sunset Sound in Hollywood. Prince was eager to record that day because he deeply desired to work through an idea that he had come to through a jam session that previous night. Prince would name this song We Can Fuck, a 10-minute long track that featured backing vocals by Jill Jones, who we just kind of talked about, as well as the Revolution members, really Wendy Malvoyan and her then girlfriend, really Lisa Coleman. Lisa's brother, David Coleman, can also be heard playing the oud in the song. We Can Fuck finds Prince inviting listeners to join him on a journey through a casual sexual encounter. From courtship to climax to post-coital conversation, lots of C's there. And while I want us to experience the whole song, much as I wanted us to do in Vibrator, I'm gonna kind of really sort of restrain myself and only play a clip of the song's bridge, which finds Prince entering, reaching, and exiting the climax.
Okay, well then maybe it's me, but I know the smell of desire, honey, it's all over you. I could tell the things that get you excited, things you never heard.
Okay. I'm gonna, Dan, I know last night we were talking about your book and Big Feelings, and like, oddly, that is a song that oddly makes me emotional. It's a very bizarre situation whenever I listen to it, that particular part. Anyway, New Year's Eve, 1983, right, this is when Prince records this song. It's important for the recording, not simply because it's a holiday, right, and sort of New Year's sets of connotations, right? More importantly, because it's on New Year's Eve, it's the day after the Minneapolis City Council voted in favor of the anti-pornography ordinance. And when that ordinance passed, it was not simply contained within the local news. The New York Times and the Washington Post had reported about Minneapolis making this historic vote through the City Council to pass this ban on pornography. Even more so, when Prince ended up finishing We Can Fuck on January 3rd of 1984, a few days later, that occurred the day before the Minneapolis Mayor Frazier vetoed this particular ordinance. While these can be read as coincidences, and they probably are, I don't want to dismiss this connection between this song and the anti-porn ordinance. I don't think we should see coincidences as inconsequential. Rather, I want to heed the call from scholars like Melanie McAllister that we must, quote, explain the coincidence that brings specific cultural products into conversation with specific political discourses, end quote. Indeed, it should be noted that the initial title of We Can Fuck after Prince recorded it was called Moral Majority, an allusion to the religious right organization founded by evangelists, in terms of Jerry Falwell, which sought to protect, quote unquote, forms of traditional family values from dissident gender and sexual formations, including pornography. To that end, what I find in We Can Fuck is an utter kind of repudiation and critique of the moral majority, the anti-pornography ordinance, and anti-porn feminism. The dominant narrative of anti-porn ordinances during 1984 and 1985, which was partly true, was that they were emerging out of and made strange bedfellows with feminists and very much the religious right. This was especially true in cities like Indianapolis, and while this was less true in Minneapolis, it's important to really say again that this Republican councilwoman, Charlie Hoyt, was the one who asked Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin to help in drafting the language of the ordinance and lobby local residents to support this particular piece of legislation. And it was Hoyt who actually introduced and sponsored this particular ordinance to the City Council and led efforts to reintroduce the ordinance, reintroduce the ordinance later in the summer of 1984 after Mayor Frazier's first veto. We Can Fuck, therefore, for me, is an entirely pornographic kind of affair. Sonically, the song opens slowly with a sparse arrangement, which really sort of recalls foreplay, then intensifies with multiple instruments and voices, signaling the kind of physical acts of sex, the physical acts, motions, and sounds of sex. And then it slows down again and returns to the sparse arrangement. I kind of cut it out before it turns into that, but there's a kind of post-sexual interaction, pillow talk thing that Prince does. I actually find that part really annoying. But the later the kind of latter kind of connotation is supported lyrically as Prince engages again in this post-sex pillow talk. Further, the lyrics in the clip that I just shared point to this kind of pornographic form of We Can Fuck as Prince presents listeners and his imagined sexual partner with multiple options and fantasies. Prince's character offers sex with clothes on or sex with clothes off. He alludes to role-playing activities where he can be the girl or the boy, that's the quote. He plays with objectification tropes of pornography by offering his partner to being their quote-unquote toy. He is open to multiple rounds of sex. He alludes to oral sex in the last line that I played where he sings, quote, "People say that I got no taste, then blow the candle out and tell me if it's true," end quote. He's seemingly open to non-heterosexual sex as well when he says, quote, "sex between two people," rather than sex between a man and a woman, right? We think about, again, to the moral majority here as being a conversation. I actually want to read this entire line out loud, right? That Prince sings, quote, "Sex between two people is all right," further states, again, sort of whether they're in love or not, as long as they're not trying to hurt nobody, and just as long as it's hot, end quote. So this is one of my favorite lines in the song. Two, in a more serious note, what I find so fascinating here is how Prince's reference to violence, that is, as long as they're not trying to hurt nobody, seems to take aim at how anti-porn feminists read porn as inherently, both psychically and materially violent. This line, in a sea of sort of pornographic tropes, opens space for non-violent pornographic fantasies and practices. Moreover, I also love how Prince rewrites the standard birds and the bees narrative here that would appeal to a kind of really sort of more majority crowd, right? The line about whether they're in love or not. Prince positions sex as a site and practice of lust rather than love. Prince emphasizes that sex needs to quote unquote be hot, speaking back against the notion that it's for procreation. And again, saying sex between two people rather than sex between a man and a woman marks the song as perhaps gender inclusive and diverse. And in fact, that kind of inclusivity and diversity is something that's built into the song. "We Can Fuck" throughout the entire 10 minutes lacks a gender reference. There's no he, him, his, or she, her. There's no man, there's no woman. The only time that we hear boy or girl is when Prince says that he's willing to role play being either or both during sex. In this way, Prince further drives the pornographic point home as he invites us to fantasize, those sort of figuratively, with, beside, underneath, and on top of him within the bedroom. While this might be funny, I want to take Prince's refusal to use pronouns seriously because of how gendered the anti-pornography ordinance, and as I talked about earlier with queer men and porn establishments as well, how gendered much of the anti-pornography feminist movement was within the city of Minneapolis. Heterosexual cisgender men were understood to be exclusive patrons and viewers of porn, and heterosexual cisgender women were understood to be the objects of such gaze and consumption. Indeed, it's worth noting that while Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin while noting that Billy McKinnon and Dworkin reference cis and queer men and trans people in their anti-pornography ordinance, they did so in ways that saw cis and queer men, and as well as trans people, as mere extensions or copies of cisgender women. I'm going to quote really directly from the ordinance here, that men and trans people had cause to sue porn establishments and distributors if they could show, quote, injury by pornography in the way that women are injured, end quote. And We Can Fuck, then, Prince shifts things in his pornographic fantasy. He allows women, straight, cis, queer, and trans, as well as men, straight, cis, queer, and trans, and non-binary and other dissident gender and sexual subjects to have and hold their own kind of sexual agency, to center their own pleasures and desires and practices. We Can Fuck as an invitation to imagine sexual subjectivity and pornography otherwise during this moment in 1983 going into 1984. This is where the collective we comes in. The we of dissident genders and sexualities, the we a race under the dominant logics of feminist porn wars in general and anti-pornography feminism especially, the we who will be further criminalized, policed, and surveilled due to the anti-pornography ordinance and the marriage, and as well as the marriage of conservative sets of morality and politics wrought by the moral majority. In the face and aftermath of the anti-pornography ordinance passage, We Can Fuck feels and sounds like a comforting response of possibilities. We can still fuck. We will still fuck. Prince is and provides an interruption here for the status quo. There we go. And so it's with this that I'd like to begin to conclude my talk this afternoon. Checking time. Okay. In particular, I want to return to the Peters brothers who opened my talk today. So only a few months following the Peters brothers' protest of Prince in the Prince of Porn, Washington, D.C. sets of political wives, Tipper Gore, who was the wife of then Senator Al Gore, Susan Baker, who was the wife of a Treasury Secretary, James Baker, Sally Nevis, who's the wife of D.C. Councilperson John Nevis, and Pam Howard, who was the wife of Realtor Raymond Howard, formed the Parents Music Resource Center, or the PMRC. an organization dedicated to addressing and regulating inappropriate music. Some of you might not know, but I'm sure you can kind of guess now, the impetus for the formation of the PMRC was none other than Prince. Tipper Gore, the head and face of the PMRC, had recently purchased the Purple Rain soundtrack album for her daughter. And while listening to the album together, they got to the song titled Darling Nikki, a sexual song about a woman sex fiend. So we're gonna take a short listen to that.
I guess you could say she was a sex fiend. I met her in a hotel lobby, masturbating with a magazine. She said, how'd you like to waste some time? And I could not resist when I saw little Nikki grind. Took me to her castle and I just couldn't believe my eyes. She had so many devices, everything that money could buy. She said, sign your name on a dotted line. The lights went out and Nikki started to grind.
So, as was the case with Vibrator, we have an allusion to sex toys and masturbation, right? Nikki had, quote, so many sets of devices, everything that money could buy. And similar to We Can Fuck, we have references to premarital sex and sex upon which really the kind of moral majority would very much frown. Tipper Gore was enraged by what she heard on Darling Nikki. So she ended up calling her Washington friends and wondered if they were dealing with similar kinds of situations and having similar kinds of frustrations with sex and pop music. They did, and so they formed the PMRC. One of the first actions of the PMRC was really developing a list of what they deemed as the most explicit songs in the music industry at this moment. They dubbed this list the Filthy 15. And Prince, as an artist, writer, a very much associated act, appeared 3 times on this list, more than any other artist. It's worth noting that the use of filthy on this list in Prince's popularity aligned with the Peters brothers and their own kind of title for Prince as, quote, the filthiest artist in America. What's more than that, the PMRC share with the Peters brothers is what they named the explicit music of Prince and his contemporaries. The PMRC called Prince's music and his sets of contemporaries, quote unquote, porn rock here. It's worth also noting that when the Peters brothers protested outside of the state capitol in St. Paul and had Prince of Porn and called him the filthiest article in America, that same month is the same month that Tipper Gore purchased Purple Rain for her daughter, and they actually sort of listened to it, and that sparks the kind of PMRC. So these things are happening during the same month in the same year. So with that said, right, I'm not trying to say that the PMRC's name of porn rock is a riff off the Peters brothers' name for Prince as the Prince of Porn, although you can certainly make that argument, but rather I want to point out the similarity in their use of porn, their use of filthy, because they both tie into the growing anti-pornography laws at this moment, which originated, again, in Minneapolis. And very much as I've kind of argued throughout this talk, Prince's music should really be discussed in resonance to this moment. By the formation of the PMRC in May of 1985, and especially by their own kind of congressional hearing on porn rock in September of 1985, several cities across the US had implemented, voted on, or entertained and enacting anti-pornography ordinances that were based on the Minneapolis Ordinance. To that end, with the PMRC using the phrase porn rock just as it was for the Peters brothers and using the phrase Prince of Porn, the PMRC was attempting to tap into a particular historical moment of the feminist sex wars in general and anti-porn feminism in particular. More to the point, the PMRC, just like the Peters brothers, were also pinpointing a relationship between music and sex culture via Prince and the feminist sex wars. And it's this kind of connection, I realize I forgot to put this back on the screen, that I've tried to, and it's this kind of connection that I've tried to make throughout this talk today. But I've tried to do, using these two examples of We Can Fuck, as well as Vibrator and a little bit of Darling Nikki, is to think through the ways in which Prince's music might help us rethink and reframe the feminist sex or feminist porn wars, especially but not exclusively with how they emerge in a city like Minneapolis. A turn to Prince's catalog opens sets of groundwork for a more intersectional analysis of the feminist sex wars. They allow us to consider and highlight the perspectives and states of communities like Black women, Black queer men, and as well as dissident sexualities and others who have largely been forgotten or very much elided in dominant narratives surrounding the feminist sex wars. Indeed, as Lisa Dugan recently wrote, our contemporary moment's discussion of sex work, pornography, sexual violence, and harassment have led many to revisit and reappraise the feminist sex wars of the 1970s and 1980s. And yet what Lisa Dugan highlights is, quote, a core issue at the center of the 1980s sex wars often gets lost in present day forms or recollections, is that a central component of it was a debate over the politics of queer desire. The embrace of multiple genders, gender bending, kink, and the morphing of intimate and non-intimate connections beyond the monogamous couple form. That became a central site of these forms of political content, central site of political contention, end quote. So it's with this insight from Lisa Dugan, who was a central figure within the sex wars at this period in the 1980s as well, that really guides my focus on Prince and the sex wars here. I'm attempting to consider what opens up, what shifts, when we move to the seemingly inconsequential, the seemingly unconnected, or the ungermane. Indeed, Prince and the feminist sex wars at first blush might seem to have little to do with one another. But that's precisely why I'm interested in this project and more broadly this kind of work that I actually do. It's to treat and take what appears to be disparate and make them resonant, make them intimate, and make them relational. So with that, I want to thank you all again for coming to this talk and for listening. And I thank you in advance for all kinds of engagements and questions and comments. So thank you.